it helps to just normalize the conversation.
Yeah.
It's funny how even just for myself, when I think through how often do I talk about how Jesus is moving in my life today, like even when I talk to my wife or as I talk to my kids, do I talk about, oh look, hey, look at this is how Jesus moved today, or do I ask the question, hey, how has Jesus moved, or what are the God sightings that we like, that you've had in your life today? We can go through life so fast paced and so task oriented on either our vocation or either the deadlines we got to meet. That is often what hinders our evangelism, and we don't know it. We don't know it does because when we are so singularly focused on us and what we have to do, we can lose sight of how God is moving.
Welcome back to Studio Conversations. It's been a long while.
How long has it been?
It's been long enough, ever since the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. I think, we didn't do anything. No, we did. I wasn't a part of that one, though. So it's like,
okay.
I don't
you
know.
didn't do it.
So I didn't do it.
I wasn't a part of it either.
I didn't pay. So we just don't pay attention unless
we only care about
pops
things
up.
that we're in.
Anyways, so now we're back. We got Sam, Reverend Pastor Sam, Dr. Sam?
September 14th.
September 14th, Dr. Sam coming to you. And today we're going to be talking about something that kind of struck us both recently in a conversation. But the broad topic being modern evangelism and what are we doing these days? What does evangelism look like in 2020? And not even necessarily like pandemic related, but just as like Christians living in the future. Like we've come through many eras of what evangelism has looked like. And so want to shed some light on what it is today. And I mean, how do we be the best evangelists that we can be? How do we go out into the nations and into our neighborhoods and proclaim the name of Christ in a way that was the way he intended us to?
Yeah. And in a way that's not awkward.
And in a way that's not awkward.
And not like, I don't know.
Yeah. Awkward is like contextual. That's the main thing.
That's true.
Awkward is very contextual because historically speaking, and maybe this was awkward, I can't speak for someone and I wasn't really alive when it was happening, but the whole Bible tracts and handing out things that like go door to door, handing out tracts, and great to get information out there and things like that. And maybe it was more effective at a time and at a different place in our culture. But now, if you and I were to go do that,
go hand a track out. Yeah, I don't know how.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know how receptive people are.
And maybe that's a generational thing too.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe an older generation would appreciate it more than we would. Tracks. Love them.
I had that one, the dollar bill, the $100 million bill.
The $1
million
bill, yes. Anyway.
And that's not to, that's not to downplay those people who are on the street corner who are very passionate about evangelism.
Absolutely.
They're extremely passionate about making. They see that, hey, there are a lot of people who are going to die and they're going to go to hell. They need Jesus.
Yeah.
And they're...
If you're going to get hit by a bus, I'm going to push you out of the way.
Right. Yeah, I want to help. If I got a vaccine to help, I'm going to give you a vaccine to help you.
Way to keep it relevant.
I didn't mean to go the whole relevant route on that. But, so I get the heart and the passion behind it, but we often can't let our heart and our passion... Well, I won't say what I was about to say. Okay. That's my filter kicking in.
So
I have one.
Finally. It took 4 months of staying indoors to finally build it up. So I do want to start this off by talking about the awkwardness that typically comes that I'm sure literally everyone has experienced when thinking of evangelism, even like in approaching the subject or trying to do it. I know there's lots of people who like their churches would like youth groups would take them out and then like, hey, we're going to go evangelize and we're just going to practice this and kind of go through it.
Yep.
So what's your experience with it? What's kind of the things that you learned early on with evangelism?
Well, let me answer that question in two ways. One on a personal level and then one on a professional level.
Doctor.
On a personal level, I think, I think the beautiful thing about getting on that street corner and proclaiming Jesus and that people need Jesus is that if you're able to do that, you almost break through sort of a timidness of wanting to talk about Jesus. You're willing to face the embarrassment, if you will, and there's actually a huge strength in that. Because then when you are on a more relational level, maybe in a coffee shop or you've been mentoring or meeting with a coworker or a boss, you're willing to take that leap of faith and just bring up the topic of Jesus. And on a professional level, so I see some value in youth groups going out on street corners or going door to door and doing some of that because it's helping sort of break sort of that unknown or that barrier.
It's pushing you up here so everything down here is not so...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is some value in that. I don't know how fruitful those conversations are. But that's one thing you have a hard time measuring when you talk about evangelism is you don't often know what type of fruit you're going to get from it. Which is partly why I love landscaping so much, because if I put in the work to dig 6 holes to plant some fruit trees, I know that by the time I get done with that, I'm going to have 6 holes. But when you put in the work for evangelism, oftentimes you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if that person really, what type of, I guess, spark that you're planting in their heart and soul that's eventually going to catch flame, and you often won't ever get to see it at times. But evangelism. So that's on a personal level, but on a professional level, one of the things that irritates me or stresses my heart and soul out a little bit is when I try to encourage people either through a sermon or just through interactions and discipleship with some leaders to encourage people to go out and evangelize. But immediately you see a blank stare of terror come over them because we...
Or just full on, nah.
Right, exactly. I don't think I'm there yet, or I don't think I can. And I think it's because we as a church, capital C church, not Foothills Church, but maybe we have contributed to it a little bit. We've always thought that evangelism looked like these 4 steps, and you have to walk through, this step first,
which is somewhat the track mindset.
Yep, it is. You got to go hand out those tracts or whatever.
Like the whole ABC concept of being saved is fine, but it's not a good glimpse of what the fullness of what it actually is and what the whole process.
And so, just this last staff meeting, we were having a conversation with some missionaries, and they're ministering to Muslims in the Middle East, and and he was talking about how he just goes on in his day-to-day life, and he just brings up Jesus through random conversations. He doesn't make it all. He doesn't go through the ABC thing. He said, when people ask me what I do, I just tell them, gosh, what I do is I just communicate what Jesus has done for me already, and he just starts talking about his personal testimony of how Jesus has moved in his life. And I thought, gosh, that's, it's not this this formula that you're walking. And formulas, while they're good and they can give some direction,
some people thrive with formulas. It's not to knock that at all.
No, I'm not trying to knock it, but they're not very fluid. Sometimes the person you're talking to doesn't need 1 + 1 = 2. Maybe all they need to know is, oh, I know what 2 is, and maybe you can help me with the second part of the formula. They don't need the whole thing, or others maybe they do need the whole thing, and it's not a very fluid. It's not very fluid.
Yeah.
So
life is not too often cut and paste.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things I try to do is just try to coach people into just normalizing the conversation. You don't need to be awkward. You just need to be yourself.
Well, okay. So let's. Okay, Sam. I didn't mean to say it like that. Well, okay. Calm down. No, I want to kind of park in this camp a little bit because I think there's a lot a lot more to dig in. Like, there's no need to be awkward as someone who's just awkward. Awkward is inevitable, but awkward is okay. Like, just from a conversational or even confrontational side,
yeah.
like awkwardness and discomfort,
I see what you're
they
saying.
happen, and they're going to happen, and expect them to happen. But know that it's fine. Awkward. That's just an opportunity for something new to happen.
Yep.
In there. However,
I would agree with that. I think you're right.
However, the stumbling block of awkwardness is the block to relationship that people perceive. Like, oh, I don't now get to have a same relationship with you, or you're going to look at me differently in a way that I can't fully be myself and you accept me. And that's always kind of the...
Yeah, you're afraid of
dance.
how people are going to perceive you after you bring up Jesus.
Right. And the Pharisee in me stands up and goes, well, that's just worrying about image, and you shouldn't worry about your image like that or and whatnot. But it's like, no, I don't think it is. I think it's the genuine, like, you come to someone and you want to connect with them. You want to have a relationship with them. And so that awkwardness is typically pushed aside, and I'm just actually going to keep that to myself and make it more of a me thing.
Yeah.
And then as you get closer to me, you'll understand, like, oh, they're a Christian and they go to church. And that's one of the things that that like later on transitioned in me from the ABC to the, well, it's about relationship.
Yep.
And then Christ will be revealed in relationship with
Yep.
you, like if you're connected with him, which I do agree is true. And I think there is something very important to note in there of, like, what's the work of the Holy Spirit in all of this?
Yep.
You know, like, I will profess him with my life, but the Holy Spirit will do the work in you. Like, kind of what you were saying before of the, well, I'm talking to someone and I'm not sure if I'm going to see the change. Like, the good thing about being able to plant trees versus this. And that's in the trusting of the Holy Spirit. Like, you know what? I did what I did and came to this. But going back to the relationship part of that, we've been taught the relational model, as in let my life profess this. However, I think what I've observed more is the deferring is what we do within that section. So it's like,
Oh, yeah,
I'm going to defer to the Holy Spirit
Yep.
to do his work.
Yep.
And hopefully they'll just see something in me going on.
Yep.
Or I'm going to defer to bringing them to church and let the church do the thing. Basically defer all responsibility to anyone else, so I don't have to feel awkward and risk relationship or breaking relationship in that.
Yep.
And I will fully say, like, that has been, I've been that way for the longest time. And I think I'm still struggling with that way.
Yep.
Of what does it actually look like to just show up and say who I am. Because that's the weird thing. It's like, Jesus has changed me. And that's a huge thing. And my temperament is not a sign holder screamer on the sidewalk change because I care. Or sometimes it comes out a little different than that. But I don't know. Even so, there's like, run with that. You have thoughts on this.
No.
Because, keep going.
Yeah, because I really what I think you're getting at, and I think what fuels sort of what can often fuel the awkwardness. First, that was a great word on you need to embrace the awkwardness, because it really is going to be it probably will be awkward, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it being awkward. But there are also things we can do to make it less awkward than it needs to be.
Right.
And oftentimes we can place the task of evangelism and confuse it or misplace it or replace it over or prioritize it over relationship. And I tend to find that
And
when
that's
you
the stuff
do
we
that,
push back on
when you place task over relationship, then that actually hinders evangelism.
And
then rather
relationship.
fuels it. And relationship, right? Because they're just thinking, well, this person just wants to put a number on saying that, that I trusted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and you're not really, they're not really getting any relationship there.
Right.
I think that relationship to Jesus, a pathway to relationship with Jesus, is through relationship with others. I mean, that's how Jesus modeled his ministry. And the other thing is he never used a formula really to bring people to in real relationship with him.
He met them where they were at.
Yeah, all of his encounters were were very others oriented, very sort of figuring out where are they at spiritually, and I'm going to meet them there, and I'm going to lead them to the truth. And
I would even say some of it was happenstance too. Like he went to a well, and
Right.
there was a woman there, and he's like, "Oh, I know everything about you."
Yes, right.
And now I'm just gonna have this. Like it was just, he was living.
yeah,
Jesus
he was
just
very
lived.
he was very fluid in his evangelism.
It was a part of his life,
But
but he was vocal about it, and he showed up fully as Jesus.
yep,
And maybe that's easy to say because he was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so he just unashamed.
right.
This is
He
who
would-
I
he would
am.
talk
I'm
about
gonna
it.
talk. Like,
But the other part that you touched on too was the deference. We often think, well, this is the pastor's job, or this is
th-
this, you know.
maybe not even like a full-on job of this person's gonna do the thing like I expect it, but oftentimes we work in like more ethereal type, like somehow we come to a conclusion, but it's just this unknown mist in the distance, and so it's like, I'll bring them to church, and then something's
Right.
gonna happen
know,
to them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Brian will preach a sermon, or a song will hit him, or and maybe that's just the reality that we've all come to Christ through different ways, like different paths and whatnot. But yeah, it's like this deference to something.
But it's funny how we can. It's funny how we can care so much about. Maybe it's a sibling you've been trying to minister to, or a friend, or evangelize to, and you're always praying for them, and you're praying for them, and you're praying for them, and that's good.
Yeah.
But sometimes maybe God's like, okay, now it's time for you to, like, talk about Jesus.
Yeah.
So, and really nudging you in that, and stepping out from fear into trust, and trusting that God's going to do His thing. The Spirit uses us in that way, and so we can't lean on deferral. We gotta take responsibility because He's given us. He's called us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, I don't know how you want to move into this. Move farther into this conversation, but I think some of the aspects though that I really wanted to touch on is just so what practically, what does that
Absolutely. Yeah.
what does it look like to evangelize to a sibling?
We're driving. We're driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Practically, what does that look like? And I just want to tell a story that happened last night.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because this is something that I'm not a pro at either. I think there's two areas of evangelism for me. There's the professional area.
You hear that? Your pastors aren't pros at this.
No, not at all.
We feel like
and do I have fear with it? Absolutely. And oftentimes I just got to trust God that God's going to move and interact. And how many times have I said a prayer when I'm interacting with a friend or a believer? Or a friend or just even an acquaintance. How many times have I always prayed that prayer, Lord, if you're opening the door for me here, then may you give me the direction and the empowerment and the words to say that you want this person to hear, to bring them closer to you. I always just regularly have that running around the back of my head. Because there's a lot of discernment in it too. There's discernment in telling people about Jesus when they're most receptive of it, and when their heart's ready, and you often don't know that, but you gotta lean on the Holy Spirit's empowerment. Anyways, I say all that to say, so last night I had our electrician who's actually a good friend of mine, and I've been walking with him in relationship for 7 years now, and that's the thing about evangelism too, is it's not this short. It's not. Some interactions can be short. Other interactions can be years. Alex, who works on staff here, I've been ministering to that kid since the crib, evangelizing to him since the crib, and it wasn't until I left for seminary, and then our youth pastor came in, and our college pastor came in and evangelized to him, and he accepted Jesus. And I'm like, I put in 19 years of work on this dude, and now, I didn't get to see the fruit of it,
Yeah, you did.
But I did. I get to see it now. So I've been walking with this guy, this electrician, and friend of mine for 7 years, and he was over working on my house on something, and we were just talking, and I thought, hey, why don't I just talk about how God's moving in my life? And so I just started talking about, he asked me this question. I said, it's funny you asked me that, because this is how God has been, how I feel God's given me direction in this, because I've been navigating through some big decisions in my life and whatnot, and this is how God has been speaking to me, going this direction or going that direction. I honestly, I think that God will just open the door for it to happen, because he has in the past. And I talked to him about some experiences in the past where I had a big decision coming up, and God was like, yeah, this is the way you should go. And when I stepped out in faith, he just showed up. And it wasn't awkward. It wasn't, it was just me talking about my experience with God and how I've seen him move in my life. And by just talking about my experience, it led him to talk about,
isn't that what a testimony is?
That's sort of, that's sort of like my son when he was expecting to get some shoulder surgery, but with COVID and everything happening, he wasn't able to get it. But then they started opening up this, they had a bunch of we found this one area that was able to perform the surgery and willing to do it, but they had some other peeps but in front of him, and it just so happened that the day where we wanted him to get it, that person had a cancellation, and so we got him in, and it was like, so yeah, I can see how God does that. And this guy doesn't, he doesn't, he doesn't proclaim, he doesn't really know much about God, and yet it's sort of that my story.
That's so cool.
Got him thinking about, oh wait, that could have been how God was working in my life, which led obviously to a great conversation about how God works in our lives. And
Just
so,
a little bit of eye-opening and just seeing.
Isn't that fun, though? I mean, then I walk away amped up because I'm talking to this guy about God that I haven't been talking to him about God in a long time. But it all started not by me trying to get him to believe that there's a God. It all started by me just talking about what has my experience been like with God. Yeah.
And there is some credit due to, oh man, your life would be so much better with Jesus. Like, just seeing like decisions made, like... coming at it from that angle, like not trying to get those two things down, but the difference of task versus the relationship part of it, where it's like that is a motivated out of like, oh, like I hurt for you, like I want you to know what would be good. I want you to take your medicine or drink water or do something like that.
Let me help you.
Yeah, let me help you. Versus I'm always going to make sure that like throwing in Jesus right there and right there and right there.
Right. Yeah.
Like I will get you saved or something like that.
Well, there's a humility behind the one approach versus the other, I feel.
Very true.
Because we can often think that we're the one who saves, but we're not the one who saves. God's the one who saves.
Yeah, and I think that's another practical evangelism component of the self-awareness to all. That's a life thing, really, but self-awareness within evangelism of why am I here? Why am I actually doing this? Do I care about them, or am I just trying to do the duty, like accomplish the duty? Very much so. It's very relevant. I would also say I almost lost it and then it came back. The self-awareness piece in the whole fear part of this, in the being afraid of losing relationship and coming into it. I think we all need to recognize, yes, we could approach it from we have nothing to fear of man, like fear God, not man type thing, and therefore go in there. I don't know how often that actually plays out well. To some personalities, I think it's like, let's go. Yeah. For someone more like me, I think it's recognizing the value of showing up in relationship in general. Yeah. And knowing that Jesus is a very relevant and real part of my life. And so being able to risk relationship for showing up completely with that, and fully knowing that some people aren't going to take well to it. It might get awkward, but that's okay. Awkwardness is a part of any relationship. I've had awkwardness with really close friends, and I'm still in relationship with them. Like, it's just a part of life. And so being able to show up as yourself and let evangelism take place, like within that relationship. Like that's the only way it's going to happen. And oftentimes we like to curb that and pull stuff back and hide it, or again defer to other things to take care of. And like I'll let my relationship with Christ just be mine, and not anyone else's. Like I think that's the big mistake, both for evangelism and for relationship.
Yeah.
That can happen.
Well, and I think, not to keep going in circles on this, but it helps to just normalize the conversation.
Yeah.
It's funny how even just for myself, when I think through how often do I talk about how Jesus is moving in my life today? Like even when I talk to my wife or as I talk to my kids, do I talk about, oh, look, hey, look at, this is how Jesus moved today? Or do I ask the question, hey, how has Jesus moved? Or what are the God sightings that we, that you've had in your life today? We can go through life so fast paced and so, task oriented on either our vocation or either the deadlines we got to meet, that is often what hinders our evangelism, and we don't know it. We don't know it does because when we are so singularly focused on us and what we have to do, we can lose sight of how God is moving and how He is moving in our life. So how do you evangelize to someone when you want to give them a testimony? How can you give them a testimony if you don't even know how God has moved? If you don't have eyes out there going, oh yeah, look at how God's moved, or you're not aware of how God's moving. It's amazing how just your awareness of how God's moving impacts your ability to evangelize to your friends. And we don't think of it that way.
And without enough time to give to yourself to just reflect on what has God been doing lately, like where has He been working, and if you haven't been paying attention, open my eyes, Jesus, let me see it.
Yeah, then what do you have to share?
Yeah.
What do you have to share? And the other part too is that the other roadblock. So one roadblock to evangelism I see is that it's not having the awareness of how God's been moving in your life. That's one roadblock I think to evangelism. The other roadblock is relational IQ. You're too self-centered. You're too focused on yourself that you don't know where your friends or acquaintances or your coworkers are emotionally, spiritually. You don't know where they're at. Yeah. And that's when I lean on Paul, where he talks about in 1 Corinthians 9:22, I become the weak to the weaks, I become the strong to the strong, I become all things to all people, so that some may be saved. And how much of evangelism, yes, is focused and spirit-led on Jesus, but also centered around where are the other people at? So you can meet them where they're at. If you don't know where they're at, emotionally, spiritually, then how do you meet them? How do you meet them on the same level and have the discernment to be able to discern whether or not the soil's hard or soft or whatever?
Yeah.
So I think, those two things definitely roadblock evangelism.
For sure. Yeah, I think the other part is that will typically get muddied into it is, am I supposed to be a missionary now? Like, evangelism, so I need to go to another country and then go do this kind of stuff. Yeah. Which is also a classic example in a lot of evangelism sermons or things talked about as like, no, you don't have to be a missionary. But I would honestly say, I feel like everyone should pray about that. And everyone should be seeking this out of, well, God, you know my temperament, and you know my relational IQ so far and all this kind of stuff. Like, all of this stuff. What do you want to do with it right now in the moment? And is it already transplanting me? Is it gearing me up to transplant me? Or is it keeping me here? Yeah. Like, am I doing well? Like, are you telling me to do well with what I have right in front of me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we all need to be keeping a pulse and in constant relationship with God to understand, like, he's doing something in you right now. He's pushing you somewhere. So pay attention to that as well. Like, of course, having a testimony for what he's already done and just the other workings of your life that he's been involved in, but where's he heading right now?
Yeah, I think, yep. Yeah. And again, that's just a huge level of discernment and relationship with Jesus and being able to hear the Spirit's leading in his voice, which again comes to spiritual disciplines. It comes to taking time to invest in your relationship with Jesus so that you can follow its leading to invest in others. But another piece too that I've been... Sorry, we're just really rambling about... I know.
This is great. This is how my brain works.
About evangelism. And I think we can put we'll bring some structure to it. But another aspect that keep coming back to with evangelism too, because it's something that I'm really passionate about. Is oh shoot, I lost it. What was it? I lost it. It's just not you. You're not the only one. That's it. Discernment in not only God's leading and seeing where God's moving in the lives of others, or if he's calling you to a new area or to a new relationship or whatever, but also discernment in how much information you give when you give it, how much truth you give when to give it. Oftentimes as believers, we tend to think, and when we think of evangelism, especially in the formulas, with the formulaic version of evangelism, we'll want to give all of the truth.
Yeah.
And tell them, this is your sin, and this is how you can be forgiven, and this is how you can experience redemption, and this is now how you should go and live.
Smack you with info.
We just sort of usher it all on. But one of the things that you see in Jesus that he models in his ministry is great discernment on the dosage of truth, if you will. In fact, when
between the Beatitudes and the little conversation that he has,
right, because when he, I don't know the exact passage. I'll have to Google it, but I don't know the exact passage. But he's having a conversation with his disciples about truth, about what's going to happen in the end times, and this was right before his work on the cross, if I recall. And he looks at them and he says this. He says, "I have so much more to tell you, but your hearts can't receive it just yet." And that just clues me into the fact that, wow, we at times want to usher the whole plate of truth to people, but their bellies aren't full enough. You know, their appetite's not there just yet. And so sometimes it's just placing little appetizers of truth here or there. And I think of a guy named Francis Schaeffer, one of my all-time favorite books, The God Who Is There. He was an apologist, but he was a relational apologist. He wouldn't go and debate people, but he would sit around and have conversations about the existence of God over a cup of coffee. And one of his things was bringing people to a point of contention, a point of conflict within whatever their worldview may be, or with whatever they may be struggling, because he believed that just by bringing to that point of conflict, that will lead them to discovering God, the existence of God. And so it wasn't just sort of, oftentimes it's not just, here's the truth that God exists and Jesus died for you and this is all at once. Sometimes it's just, hey, who do you think created all this? And just leaving the conversation at that, and then maybe coming back to it, months later, and
you'll probably just hear interesting answers regardless of that.
Right, exactly. And just slowly, having discernment. Are people ready to get the full dosage, or are they not?
What I love of what's happening.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. What I love of what's happening when you're doing that is it's changing it from this duty or this fear, like this is gonna get weird, or I'm gonna lose my relationships, or people are gonna hate me, or whatever, and it's making it exciting.
Yep.
And I think the reason why it's exciting is because it's just like we're all in this. In this moment, and that's what relationship is. We're all in this, It's like we're taking it one bit at a time, and even being able to approach it in a open-ended question. It's not I'm going to ask this question so that I can tell you what the truth is. It's let's talk about it. Like, I'm actually really interested to hear what you think about this.
Yes.
Because maybe there's, the insight that you can get from children. Like maybe there's insight that you can get just from people who think differently as well.
Yep.
That might actually still line up with the Bible and Scripture and expand.
Well, and what you're getting at, too, is the ethos of the individual, of the one evangelizing. Aristotle, he talked about the three aspects of an argument, right? And of persuasion, the best way to persuade people. And he said the most persuasive aspects, so you got the logos, the pathos, and the ethos. The ethos is your character, the logos is the logic behind the argument, and the pathos is the passion behind it. And he said the most persuasive part is the ethos. You can have your logic way off, and you can have little to no passion about the subject, but if you are an integrous person, if you have strong ethic, if you are humble, if your character is and you show that you care, then you will persuade that you'll persuade people into illogical things. But here we have,
and let's hope that the logos and the
right,
that everything else
with
is
evangelism,
doing
obviously
great, yeah.
the logos is 100% right on. The logic's there. We're obviously passionate about Jesus, but where is our heart and soul? What's our character like? Because if our character's not there when we're evangelizing, if our integrity's not there, if we don't care about the person that we're evangelizing to, then we're not going to persuade anyone into Jesus.
Right.
For Jesus.
Right.
It's if that misses, then it's like. And we've met those people, right? We've met those people who are passionate about Jesus.
We've met people on every single one, like just on the one types.
And then you see the response, especially with people in our generation. They don't want to have anything to do with someone who's just like a righteous.
But
yes, I'm trying to think what's an appropriate way I can put this.
I think I can say that. We'll put a warning at the beginning that I said but. Twice. Yeah. Okay, so to kind of wrap this all up, we talked kind of a little bit about the history things and the approaches that we kind of learned. Maybe some of the less helpful things that we learned at the beginning, and then more practical steps, which we just kind of flooded out.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to it.
Yeah, there's
so much to relationship, and there's so much to evangelism, and to this life walking with Jesus. And I mean, part of this even reflects just how much he's changed us, and how much that we've learned walking with him, and learning about ourselves and people and God. And I think that's really the kind of the takeaway, is that this is a constant process. But to be able to fully show up as yourself, as God sees you, even in both relationships up here and right there, to be able to care about the people that are in front of us, so much so that we would evangelize to them, but also that we would just have a relationship with them. They're not our project.
Right, yes. Oh, that's the way to put it. They're not our project.
They're not our project. And God isn't saying, if you don't get this one, that's not that relationship right there, so that's not this relationship right here.
Yep.
But that we would actively seek out, like, what is your will for me, and how can I show the love of Christ to someone right here? And maybe that's not ABC, or maybe that is ABC, judging by how well we know that person. Because again, temperament is a part of this. There are people who love, like, just give me the facts, tell me what it is, let's logically think about that. And there are those who are like, no, like, know me.
Yeah.
I've spent enough time with people who will just pour that information and who just don't get me in that way. And so it's like being able to engage in this relational trifecta going on right there, and understanding that God is in that. God is speaking not just in you and through you, but he's also speaking directly to that person as well in different ways.
Yeah, it's funny how with evangelism we can often think it all rests on us. It all rests on us. And
you hear the expression, you're going to be hit by a bus, so I need to push you. I'm the only one who's going to push you out of the way of that bus. But it's like, no,
that's not the case.
It's not the case.
I think I want to leave with this. With this, I hope it's a word of encouragement, is another personal pastoral experience. In this case, I'm at the church in Colorado that I was working at. I met with a lady who was in her 70s, and she never stepped foot in a church. It was her first time ever stepping foot in a church, and after doing so, she wanted to have a conversation with me, because she just had some questions about what is this church thing. And I thought, that's awesome, because she wants to know. There's no apathy there. She wants to learn. She wants to know. So I said, absolutely, we'll meet. And I met with her for like an hour, 2 hours. Met with her for 2 hours, and she asked questions from, why do people raise their hand in church? Is it like a funnel for God to come into them? Things like that.
That.
Oh yeah, because she didn't know. She's like, why are people raising their hands in worship?
Such a good question.
And then she was asking questions everywhere too. If God is so good, why does evil exist? So it was a whole gamut of things. It was like, whoa, this is a roller coaster ride of a conversation.
I love that curiosity.
But she wanted to know, and I was in seminary at the time, and I'm philosophy of religion major, so I had all the answers, man.
Yeah.
And I was giving her this answer and that answer and this answer, and I'm like, yes, I know this stuff. I know this stuff, and this is awesome. So I get to the end and I look at her and I go, okay, so now are you ready to engage in a relationship with Jesus? And she looks at me and she goes, no. And in my head, I'm a little confused by it, and I go, well, okay, so was there something you still got a question about? Is there something I didn't answer? Or was it, no, gosh, you made it so clear. I always wanted to know the answers to those questions, but you really brought clarity to it, and no, that was really good. And I was like, well, okay, good. So then I looked at her and I said, well, what is preventing you from wanting to engage in this relationship with Jesus? And she looked at me and she said, nothing. And that's when I saw my degree fly right out the window. And God taught me the most important lesson that he could teach me in pastoral ministry, which is, Sam, you aren't the one who saves. I am. You can give all the answers in the world, you can do all the studying in the world, and that's all good stuff. It'll help. I can use that. But in the end, you're not the one who saves. I am. And oftentimes in evangelism, we can tend to think that the burden rests on us, that we're the ones who are going to bring that person to Jesus, but we're not. We're not. We're just tools used by God in doing that. And so I want to encourage those of you who, because this is probably a hard conversation for some of you listening to this, for those of you who are listening to it, who have a brother or a mom or a dad, and you have been praying for 40, 30 years that they'll come into a relationship with Jesus, and you have guilt resting on you because they still haven't. And I want to free you from that, knowing that it's not your responsibility to save them. You're not the one who saves, but that God is. And you, brother or sister in Christ, just pray. Pray for them and love on them and regularly invest in your relationship with Jesus, because oftentimes that's the most contagious thing. That's for those close to us. Those are the people who see our relationship with Jesus and how he encourages us and fuels us to live. So,
so good. Do you have any books, any videos, anything that you'd recommend?
Oh gosh, I didn't come prepared with that.
For those who like to read and learn.
Actually, The God Who's There, I think is it's one of my favorites. So that's one book that I would definitely recommend. What is the other books? I have some. What we'll do is I will post them. We'll post them in the link below.
Yep.
That's what we'll do.
I will also throw in a book I'm actually going through right now. It's not a Christian book, but it's so good for relationships and addressing those, just those hard conversations, really. It's called Crucial Conversations. It was meant for businesses and business leaders, but it doesn't read like that. And it tackles these preconceived notions that we have when we enter into hard topics, and it helps us recognize what is actually an important conversation that we're having and what's happening in that conversation. And then how do you handle it after that? Just to be able to navigate those relationships. I think it's practical in evangelism as well, and being able to get over our own discomfort and even get over some of the lies that we think are going to happen within that conversation. We come in and we finish the narrative of that already without saying a word. So, another great book. And I only have that book because I do one book at a time. Awesome.
I should focus on that singularity of reading as well. Anyways, that was fun.
Yeah, that was good.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining. If you have any comments, any further thoughts, you can totally hit us up at either Mark or Sam at foothillscp.org or Bryce at foothillscp.org, because he answers things. He thinks, I guess. No, he does.
He's pretty smart, dude.
Yeah, or any of the pastors. We'd love to hear new ideas, further thoughts. You can comment down below if you would like to as well, and we will engage with you there. But yeah, thanks for doing this, bud.
Go share the love of Jesus.
That's right.
Thanks, brother.
Absolutely.
Cheers.